Hello there. Today I want to talk with you about an article I wrote along with my co-author, David R. Dickens, The Mystification of the Labor Process in Contemporary Consumer Culture. We begin this article by talking about the cultural studies movement. This is an intellectual movement that began in 1964 with the Center for Contemporary Cultural Studies out of England. It's sometimes abbreviated here CCCS. It drew from the work of Richard Hogarth and Raymond Williams, and it was a body of researchers in England who asked questions such as what is the relationship between culture and social class. England in this period was undergoing a bit of a transformation, and the new emphasis from the cultural studies researchers was to look at things like working class culture and the media in order to see how this change was occurring. So the relationship again between culture and social class, largely through studies in England. These theorists drew from Marxists such as Antonio Gramsci and Louis Althusser. Gramsci was interested in hegemony and how a state creates the conditions where its policies are accepted, and capitalists create hegemony where its propositions and assumptions again are accepted by people generally. Althusser talked about ideological state apparatuses, the ways in which the state again reproduces itself through ideology. And along with those theoretical contributions, there was also an emphasis on using ethnographic methods drawn from symbolic interactionism. Studies about, as I said, the mass media, the state, and working class youth were the result. Books like Subculture, The Meaning of Style by Dick Hebdige, works by Stuart Hall, and others. In the 1980s, cultural studies began to incorporate other elements into its theoretical toolbox. The work of Michel Foucault, his studies of discourse and the effect that certain ways of talking have on our understanding of things related to power, and also textual critiques, so analysis of, for example, media accounts to understand the framing of certain types of events in terms of, again, power. So what I and my co-author do in this article is we want to expand cultural studies, and we do it by wanting to critically analyze the labor process in contemporary consumer culture through a specific focus on one particular business, which are called BuildABear Workshops. These, if you haven't seen them, are retail stores where children are able to assemble their own stuffed animal, and they do it through an assembly line process. But it often involves parties where the kids get together, like, for example, birthday parties. And the bears cost roughly between 10 and 50 US dollars each. In the article, we're arguing that Build-A-Bear and Build-A-Bear workshops represent an extension of commodified leisure and the marketing of experiences. Now, this is a general move which is connected with the postmodern era. The marketing of experiences is often seen as the commodification of images, the emphasis on tourism today, the commodification of lifestyles. So this is part of a larger, you could argue, postmodern trend, along with commodified leisure activities. Build-A-Bear, though, is also involved with children, and the idea of children as a unique social category. So it's important to understand children's position in U.S. history to understand the evolution of this type of store. In particular, U.S. child labor laws were enacted between 1870 and 1930, and this helped promote a changing view of children. Before, children were economic assets to families generally. After this point, children became characterized in more sentimental terms and as innocents, needing nurturing, needing care and periods for fun, entertainment, education, to be removed from the world of work. So also in this period, in the 30s, you started to see the development of toy stores in the US and heavy marketing of toys toward children and in particular their mothers. And this is part of a larger idea of how children are encouraged at this point in US history to engage in fun, educational, self-expressive play and activities. And so a real historic change in the evaluation of this social category of people and how they are seen and what types of things they should be doing, the things that should be marketed to them in terms of their particular life stage. Also, I should note too, in the 50s, women were starting to get more discretionary income in the United States and were seen as, in many instances, the people who made the home, and so were making a lot of economic decisions regarding the domestic sphere, including things like caring for their children and purchasing toys for children. The Build-A-Bear Workshop is a particular commercial space, and in that, kids are able to go, and often, as I said before, they go in parties, and they build their own bear. They make a stuffed animal, and they do it using pre-assembled parts. So the first stage might be finding the body, which has no stuffing in it yet, but it's in the shape of a bear, a bunny, a cat. Then they insert an electronic sound effect, which they will be able to touch or squeeze once the bear is complete, and it says things like "I love you." So it's an emotional type of work that they're doing, an emotional process. They insert stuffing with titles. Stuffing is called like friendship stuffing or love stuffing. They're also inserting a heart, which they're encouraged to warm between their hands before placing it in the stuffed animal. Each animal has a barcode. There's a fluffing station to make sure the animal is fluffy and clean. And finally, they are also to give their stuffed animal a birth certificate and some stories, information by typing into a computer. Here's a picture from the web I found of one such Build-A-Bear workshop. You can see the containers here where the various bodies of the animals are, and then the resulting product once the assembly is completed. And up here you can see the phases of the assembly, choose me and this sign, and then fluff me, which is toward the end of the process. Children at these workshops create their toys through an assembly line and machines, but it isn't very much like true assembly at all, and I'll talk about that next. Through the assembly line production that the children engage in Build-A-Bear workshops, the role of real workers, likely children workers, in developing countries, in pre-assembling their toy, is rendered invisible or mystified. And that's really a key central point of this paper. Children are not encouraged to think about the first steps in the real labor process. They're instead socialized, and they're mostly upper middle class kids doing this. Because as I said, the parties can range from a $10 bear to a $50 bear per kid. So this can be an expensive thing for a birthday party of, say, 10 or more children. These mostly upper middle class kids are involved in a fun production process, again with a pre-assembled coat, which again comes from likely developing countries. And it's a fun production process. It ends with perfect products and no errors. No one is standing over these child laborers, forcing them to work harder. No one is scrutinizing the results of their work. Work also ends when the task becomes boring and the party is over. So the point here, and this is a crucial one, is that these are really the opposite of the conditions that Marx found for the proletariat and the actual working conditions of those assembling things 150 odd years ago. Also, the Build-A-Bear workshops rely on adult workers, and they engage in emotional labor. So they're expected to be cheerful, helpful, and their pay is not necessarily very high, as opposed to maybe other jobs requiring more skill or education. But there are some quotes I have in the article where their lower pay is supposedly supplemented by what could be called emotional wages. The joy of seeing children making an animal and feeling the expressive happiness that they feel while they're doing it. It's a lot like the underpaid labor of, for example, teachers who are seen as doing that work more out of a sense of calling, or social workers who are supposed to do it for its emotional rewards rather than financial rewards. The type of work they're doing, though, reflects a shift in the United States from a manufacturing-based work to service sector employment in the United States around approximately the 1970s. This involved a shift not only from the type of work, but lower wages and less job security in the US. The manufacturing jobs went to developing nations, and now US workers often are simply serving customers, as they do in helping the children in Build-A-Bear workshops. Above, I'm presenting a chart from dshort.com, which very much shows the change in employment since 1939 in the United States. And hopefully you can zoom in on this chart to see it a little bit better. But what you'll see is an extraordinary change in the volume of service sector employment. This S here marks the service sector growth line, which you see around the 60s and 70s here is starting to really take off, and this red represents manufacturing. So a huge change that is also related to Build-A-Bear and how the pre-assembly is working along with the service sector economy for those adult workers in the shop, and also, as we'll see in a second, for the children. The Build-A-Bear parties, as I said before, are not cheap, and these mostly upper middle class kids who are at Build-A-Bear workshops and parties basically learn that building, manufacture, is really supervising. So what I argue is that these children are entering into a middle class, upper middle class world of pre-assembly. Their social position is going to be above that of the proletariat, the working class. And so they're going to, for example, assemble IKEA bookshelves and things, but not really from the beginning points of chopping the wood down and sawing it and putting it together. They are really putting together the pre-manufactured parts. And they're also going to do frozen dinners, pre-assembled meals, themed environments, pre-assembled for easy enjoyment and not a lot of thinking, and computers, which are pre-assembled everything, pre-assembled data, pre-assembled information, etc. So this world that they're entering into is one where they're not going to labor directly, like Marx talked about, as much as basically just making decisions based on how other people's labor is going to be used in fashioning their life. So this is, again, a kind of a newer form of mystification of the labor process beyond what Marx talked about. So the article concerns how our political economy shapes the experiences of children and the new way in which some children may be encouraged to think based on changing economic structures and globalization. Also, too, in this process, children are encouraged to name their bear and give it a barcode, which is an identity that can be traced through a computer, and a birth certificate. And the reason I point this out is because it actually also relates to contemporary trends in manufacturing and our economy, the information age. They enter the information along with their parents. They do the data entry themselves, which is remarkable because a lot of the time people have to pay others to do data entry. The customers in this position do the data entry themselves. They give away their email and their phone numbers, and they do it at the point of sale. So they also not only are paying money for a product, but they give valuable information for the company, which they can use for marketing and perhaps other purposes. The information is collected, though, under the idea that they hope to reconnect lost bears with their owners, so that this is a potential tracking system in case a child loses his bear and parents wouldn't want to have the emotional trauma of that, so that justifies the data collection. Here again is another picture from the World Wide Web of another animal, obviously not a bear, but one built at BuildABear Workshop, with its birth certificate and the different information that's connected with it for the child, but also for that particular business. And in conclusion, David Dickens and myself, we both argue that BuildABear workshops really promote the antithesis of Marx's alienation for its customers. In other words, children really never experience the true idea of assembly, but assembly is idealized into this fun, joyful process, creative process, ironically, the antithesis of what Marx said happened under capitalist labor conditions. And this is also a commodified form of labor, an experience that's sold to parents and for their children. So this represents perhaps a new kind of model for the marketing of products. And we argue that critical cultural studies, in order to be relevant, should focus on things like demystifying the contemporary political, economic conditions that exist, and the political economy of culture. How does culture end up affecting material life? Just as we saw before in debates between Max Weber, who largely said culture helps affect material life, versus Marx. Marx said material life is what really strongly affects culture.